Good morning, and thank you for joining me today as I release A Long Wait for Change, the independent review of child protection services to Inuit children in Newfoundland and Labrador. First, let me say it is my honor and absolute privilege to be releasing this report here this morning in Nain, a Nunatsiavut territory. I was saying this morning, I think I've been in Nain once when there has not been snow on the ground, and the first time I came here was 1992. And I had forgotten how brilliant it is. So it's really beautiful to be here, and it's a privilege to be here. I would like to thank all of you for joining me here today. President Lamp, Minister Ozivak, thank you for Nunatsiavut's support in this work and for the support of your Deputy Minister, Michelle. Where did you go? Right here. Right there. For Michelle Kinney and her staff as well. She provided the assistance to help us on the ground with the help of Danielle Bakey, Darlene Jack, and Beverly Hunter. And I have to tell you, they were absolutely exceptional. Thank you. And I would like to thank Minister Lisa Dempster for being here today and for her staff that are here with her as well. We have had, Minister, the full cooperation of your department throughout this review, and I would like to acknowledge that and thank you for that. In planning for this, we also originally committed that we would go back to all of the Inuit communities that participated in this process and provide information sessions so they would see, not only just have a copy of the report, but we will go back and talk to them and tell them, you know, how all of this has come together, where their contributions have gone, and what this now looks like, and how their contributions directly contributed to the recommendations. And so we will do that over the next couple of months. We will go back to the communities and hold information sessions, and we'll also have advocacy clinics in each of those communities as well. Finally, I offer my sincere appreciation to everyone who has joined us in the discussions about this issue over the past year or so. You shared stories of both pain and hope. Your courage continues to move me. Whenever I think about this and the work that's happened and all of the things that have transpired in people's lives and the fact that they are still hopeful and that they are prepared to come forward, I can tell you that we heard you and we honor your strength, and I offer that in all sincerity. And I present this report to you today now with the heartfelt hope that it can be a part of meaningful change and it can be a part of constructive change. We acknowledge what's happened. We understand the past. We know that how that's contributed to where everything is right now. But what's really critical is how we move forward. What do the decisions look like? What do the processes look like to make things better for Inuit children and their families and their communities? That is what's really important now. How does this move forward? As Child and Youth Advocate for the province, my mandate by law is to protect and represent the rights and interests of children and youth in Newfoundland and Labrador. My office is an independent office of the legislature, which means that I do not take direction from government departments, ministers, or outside agencies. My office is independent in the work that it does. And in this work, it has truly been an independent process. I stand by the process, I stand by the findings, and I stand by the recommendations that I present to you today in this report. In the spring of 2018, I launched a comprehensive independent review of the treatment, the experiences, and the outcomes of Inuit children in the child protection system after receiving a request from the Nunatsiavut government. I accepted this request because I too believed that there were serious concerns and that better approaches were needed. This is about children's rights, and children's rights are not optional. I worked with Nunatsiavut government in developing the plan for this review and consulted along the way. I met with Minister Ozivak in the spring and his deputy and some of his staff to make sure that the report, as it was shaping up, would make sense to Inuit people, and also to see if I had missed anything. I thought that was really, really important to do that check-in before we finalized anything. From the outset, I believed really strongly that Inuit needed to be directly involved in this conversation and process, and that your voices, both young and adults, needed to be included and to be heard. And today I'm going to tell you what we found, and that there are 33 recommendations for change. Overall, I can tell you that Inuit children are struggling in the child protection system in this province. When I began this review, There were 1,005 children in care in Newfoundland and Labrador. 345 were Indigenous and 150 were Inuit. Many children have been removed from their families, their communities, and their culture. Now, this situation is not new, and it's not unique to this province, and it's not unique to Inuit. It has a long history throughout the country, but that doesn't provide any comfort. So there were 3 parts to this review. One was the community sessions and the individual interviews that we did. So we connected with about 575 people. We invited elders, young people, we invited families, extended families, foster parents, community representatives, interested community members. We had discussions and representation from various governments. We had the Nunavut government, we had the provincial government, we spoke with federal representatives and employees. We had telephone contacts with people. We had calls from people out of the province, for people who had learned about this through national news sources. And they said, you know, I used to live in Labrador. I am from an Inuit community, and I know what these issues are about. I experience them, and I want to contribute to this conversation. I don't live there anymore, but I still very much consider myself a part of my community. We visited communities of Nain, Postville, Hopedale, Rigolette, McCulvic, and also Happy Valley, Goose Bay, and Northwest River. And we also visited communities on the island where Inuit children are living. We met or we spoke with professionals on the ground. At headquarters, we spoke with representatives, and we also were approached and spoke with past employees of CSSD. And we committed to everyone that they would not be identified in this process. We wanted to provide an opportunity for people to speak with a level of comfort and safety. The second part of the review was a comprehensive file review within CSSD, and my office selected 213 files to review. And these included the in-care program, protective intervention, kinship services, youth services, and foster homes. We ensured that all Inuit communities were represented in the files that were selected, and we also selected files for Inuit children that were residing outside of Nunavut territory. I will be clear with you that CSSD did not select these files for us. We made the selection, provide the request to the department, and we had full cooperation in providing us with all of the files that we requested. And the third part of the review consisted of research. And we looked at other inquiries, commissions, reviews, reports, best practices. And so we thought that that was a real balanced approach. We provided the opportunity for community input. We looked at the files of the children and the families, and then we also did that bigger, broader piece of research. So we thought that was a good balance in terms of helping us to arrive at conclusions, findings, and recommendations. So all of this information contributed to a long wait for change. And quite frankly, it gave us an easy title. From the beginning, I believed that a critical part of this review would be to involve communities, hear people's experiences, and importantly, their ideas for change. We received very strong interest, and we also received extremely warm Inuit hospitality throughout this review process. Thank you for making us feel so welcome. For so many, your pain was real, but your strength, your commitment, and your hope were absolutely inspiring. So for myself and for my staff, I can tell you that we have been honored to be a part of this journey with you and to share now Inuit children's story. So first, let me tell you what young people told us, because their voices must be heard. First and foremost, this is their story. Inuit children and youth who were placed away from their communities told us, not surprisingly, that they miss home. They miss their families and they miss their friends. Some of them told us they'd been away for years, and they said they miss their traditional lifestyle. They told us they miss going out on the land, where they learn traditional skills and they connect with family and their elders, and we heard dreams of going home one day and hunting a polar bear. Young people told us they miss traditional foods, such as pitsik, I hope I pronounced that right. Yeah. And they miss the fun of traditional Inuit games and dances. We were absolutely delighted when they showed us the seal crawl, or the monkey dance, or the back-to-back game. Some children proudly recited numbers in Inuktitut and listened intently to stories in Inuktitut. But others said they had forgotten their language, and they saw no sense in learning it because they would only forget it again because they never hear it or they never use it. Some children had trouble pronouncing their last names or did not know the names of their brothers and sisters. We heard like they feel like they lose their cultural connections once they are removed from their Inuit culture. and many told us they feel that this loss of a cultural connection is part of losing their identity. I believe this loss is truly profound. Children told us stories that sometimes their friends were suddenly not in school and they did not know what happened to them or when they would see them again. Teachers told us that children did not generally talk about the missing classmates and that there was a sad acceptance of them being gone. For many Inuit children, the fear of loss and the experience of grief are ongoing and far too real. This is not how children should grow up. Most Inuit children grow up in strong and loving families and benefit from their family, their community, kinship connections, and their cultural ties. However, not all children have this start in life. We know that many Indigenous families continue to struggle because of the impacts of intergenerational trauma. Some parents and grandparents were abused, removed from their families and communities at very young ages, and were deprived of the love and teachings of their families. They were shamed for their culture, forbidden to speak their language and practice their spirituality. And they were meant to feel inferior because of who they were, what their name was, and where they were from. These negative experiences affect generations to come. When this is combined with factors such as poverty, lack of resources, support services, housing and food insecurity, geographic isolation, and systems which are not based in Inuit ways of knowing and understanding family, community, and relationships, then Inuit children lose out. So let me tell you a little bit about some of the themes that emerged throughout our various conversations. One of the big ones was culture. And to be honest with you, I was very heartened by that because people saw that that was so central to moving forward. Both young and adults alike spoke of the importance of culture in several ways, and I'll just touch on those for you. Cultural community, they talked about, is needed in all plans for children if they're ever removed from their culture. In our discussions and in our file review, we found this to be lacking. And you know, as an example, watching APTN is not a cultural plan. It must be vibrant, it must be real, and it must be timely. Another thing people talked about was that there's a lack of recognition and a value placed on traditional cultural approaches to healing and treatment. And in our discussions and in the file review, we found that this was lacking. Some people told us that, you know, they saw that it was only Western mainstream treatment approaches that were deemed to be acceptable. And elder teachings, for example, weren't truly valued and included in healing approaches. And Inuit practice of family and parenting and community must be understood. It's really important, I think, to understand that for Inuit, a sense of family and a sense of community all sort of combine and extend together. You know, it's about moving beyond definitions of nuclear families, and it's about, you know, those larger circles of care around children. And I think that those kinds of things are really important. Professionals also, we heard from professionals and we heard from communities that it is really important when you're working with Inuit children and making decisions for them and on their behalf and their families, that it's really, really important to understand the culture that you're working within. And we heard and we saw that this was lacking as well. Prevention and early intervention, Minister, you mentioned this as well. Prevention and early intervention was a key theme that came up again and again. And the child protection system deals primarily with crisis. It is reactive and it's non-voluntary. And CSSD is not seen as a resource where people can reach out for help early. Participants were very honest about some of their struggles to provide safe and caring homes for their children. And I give all kinds of credit for those courageous discussions that people had with us. But they said that they were frustrated because opportunities for prevention and early intervention were not within the normal range of services that people could access. They said they felt like considerable more effort goes into removing children than in supporting them in their families and in their communities. They told us that more help is needed with root causes before issues turn into crisis. And this is widely recognized as a best practice. Yet the legislation of the day, as well as the new legislation, does not speak to a clear prevention mandate. And this is hard to understand when we're looking at the protection and well-being of children. There is a real need to develop and support resources in culturally respectful ways to prevent problems and intervene earlier so that children and their families do not need to be in crisis before services arrive, and that treating the family early and holistically is important so that children can thrive in healthy communities, healthy families, and within strong communities. Children don't live in isolation. You know, if you're going to provide interventions to a child, that's really, really important, but the family supports are critical because children live in families and families live in communities. So it's really important to ensure that while there are really good interventions needed with children, that must extend to families, and that support on a broader level needs to extend to communities as well. People talked about the value of community outreach and wellness programs to wrap around children and their families to offer prevention and early intervention. And again, I will say that it's important to recognize how broader community issues such as poverty, food insecurity, lack of housing, and treatment services for addictions and mental health issues, for example, must be addressed in order to create an environment where children can have better outcomes. Not surprisingly, the topic of children in care came up repeatedly throughout our discussions with communities. When I began this review, nearly half of the Indigenous children in care were Inuit. 43% of the 150 Inuit children in care have been placed on the island. So, many had been removed not only from their family and kin, but also from their communities and culture. We received a very strong message that this is a grave concern for Inuit and that it is unacceptable, and I agree. When children move away, they become disconnected from their parents, their brothers and sisters, their extended family, their school, their friends, and their culture. When this disconnection occurs, it can be very difficult for children to integrate back. Here are some of the experiences we heard related to children in care. And for those of you who have touched this system in any way, shape, or form, which I would assume most people here probably have, that these are not surprises. There are delays and cancellations in travel plans to visit with the children. Sometimes it can be due to weather, flight changes, parent availability, could be scheduling delays, or sometimes it could be a child's fear of flying in a small plane. And these are barriers to staying connected. Supervised access visits between parents and children can occur in an unnatural setting sometimes, such as small government offices, where children may be bored, they may act out, or they may ask to go home to their foster home. And for parents, of course, this is absolutely devastating. Many children told us they've been away for a long time, and this was confirmed in our file review. They often experience multiple placements over many years and deal with several social workers and foster families. Professionals and community members describe the children's situation as being without an anchor or a footing in the home community with which to reestablish themselves. Young people told us they sometimes do not receive answers to their questions about being removed or plans to return home, and this upsets them and creates insecurity and anxiety. And here is a description from A Long Wait for Change about this issue. Going back home should be a time of joy and anticipation for children. However, it is often a time when young people feel afraid, powerless, stressed, and lost. Will they be reunited with their brothers and sisters? How will they fit back into school? Are their teachers expecting them? Will their friends accept them back? How will they deal with being angry with their parents for letting this occur in the first place? Will they be safe? Will they be blamed? And will they be removed again? The planning process is not sufficient, and any transition process for a child must ensure that age-appropriate participation and information is provided. This is their right. We heard, this part really encouraged me, I have to say. We talked a lot with people in communities about community capacity. And I think this is a real nugget for moving forward in the future. We heard clearly that there are resources in communities that could be better used to support children and their families. Inuit communities need to be more involved in decisions that affect their children. When we completed this review, some communities had not received new foster parent training for years, despite community interest and wait lists existing. And all that time, children were being sent to island foster homes. We learned of young people being in care for as long as 10 years and never being in an Inuit home. People told us the recruitment process for foster parents needs to be more timely, user-friendly, and reflect Inuit values. We heard that communities have strengths and capacity that's not fully explored, developed, or tapped into, and that these strengths can be vital in helping Inuit children. Some of these examples include family resource centers, family violence shelters, youth centers and programs, language nests, and other cultural supports. We consistently heard praise for Nunatsiavut government's Family Connections program as playing a key role in supporting families with practical support at the community level. And I have to tell you that this has been our experience as well when we've been doing advocacy work for individual children and families. So the issue of foster parents was a very vibrant discussion, and we have to acknowledge here that foster parents provide 24-hour care for children and can develop special relationships with them, and that does not depend on the community in which they live. Foster parents must be considered a vital partner in the planning process for the child. Yet we heard foster parents express frustration with not being informed or prepared for a child's placement sometimes with them. And they said they frequently felt excluded from decision making. Some foster parents, particularly in Inuit communities, and particularly when it came to issues around payments, there was considerable frustration about delays in payments and financial support. They told us that timely payments are extremely important because of the extremely high cost of living. This is a reason why some people cannot commit to provide care, especially for sibling groups. We found foster homes caring for Inuit children on the island had higher levels of support, such as training, respite and babysitting services, and other professional supports that foster homes that we reviewed in Labrador did not have. Some foster parents in Labrador expressed concern and frustration about extended periods of time without CSSD visits and supports. Based on our file review, this did not appear to be an issue for island foster homes, where social work monthly visits seem to be the norm. Overall, we found recruitment and training for new foster parents to be lacking. This despite the ongoing practice of placing children outside their communities and culture because of lack of foster home placements. As an example, CSSD confirmed in February that Pride foster parent training had not been offered in Nain at that time since April of 2016. I know there were some plans for the spring, so I don't know if that got off the ground here. But when I first became child and youth advocate, a couple months later, I think one of my first trips was to come up the coast here. And I was here in February of 2017, and I learned at that time that there were potential foster parents that were waiting, that they were interested, and they were waiting for this program. And so I relayed that information to the department, and I was really surprised when CSSD provided me with the information this past winter that 2 years later, the training had not occurred. And I realized there are staff vacancies, and I'll get to that in a minute in terms of some of the human resource issues. But it's really, really important because people lose interest when they see this lack of response. And these are the very people that can make a vital difference in Inuit children's lives, and they cannot afford to be lost. When we talked about working together, there was broad acknowledgement that child protection and the well-being of children requires more than child protection services through the Department of Children, Seniors and Social Development. It involves government services, it involves community resources, and it involves family. People understood and they appreciated this. And on a practice level, our file review of protective intervention files showed that less than 60% in our sample that we looked at showed collaborative case planning, including families. So in discussions about the principle of collaboration, we also heard repeatedly that collaboration must be authentic. It must mean working with people together for a shared purpose. It must be respectful and address power imbalances within Inuit communities. And these approaches cannot be driven by government authority and policies. There must be an equality at the table. We heard that Inuit are tired and frustrated with this old way of doing business and want to be equals at the table and want to be recognized and valued for their own unique Inuit knowledge and expertise. The discussions that we had around human resources were big and they were broad. Much work is required in this area, and it extends beyond provincial government positions. Now, my mandate does not include addressing individual employee performance. If such issues or questions did arise, I refer them to the government department to address through the appropriate means. It was not my job, and it was not my mandate, and it's not what I do. Having said that, the issues that we looked at and that we found and that emerged from very open, genuine discussions with people really pointed to the bigger, broader, systemic issues that are creating problems and barriers. This work is difficult. Make no bones about it. This is very difficult work in the best of circumstances, and decisions weigh heavy on people. I believe there are many people both inside and outside of CSSD that work really hard every single day. And they don't get better outcomes for Inuit children and their families because of the structure of the system. It's not about individual deficiencies. I know that many social workers and others who do this work every day go home at the end of the workday and they feel like their mission falls short. Social workers are stressed, and some of the reasons include heavy workload, staff turnover, ongoing vacancies, a lack of support which includes both training and clinical supervision, and the understanding that the people that they are employed to help do not trust them. The current approach expects a social worker to investigate parents but does not mandate prevention. Earlier and more proactive services will provide opportunities to work with the family and build trust, improve services, and I think, quite frankly, would offer higher levels of satisfaction for everyone involved. Staff vacancy rates are very concerning. Over a 3-year period, we found that the CSSD social work vacancy rates in Goose Bay to be 21%, in Nunatsiavut communities to be 27%, and the community service workers positions in Nunatsiavut communities, the vacancy rate was 31%. This is a problem. This work is not about equipment, it's not about tools, and it's not about technology. This work requires people and relationships to make it happen, and when you don't have the people on the ground, then you're going to be really hampered in trying to realize those kinds of goals. There is significant staff turnover. The highest number of social workers we saw on a file was 11. Each time a new social worker becomes involved, the child and the family has to start all over again with them. And this undermines continuity and building any kind of a trusting relationship. More Inuit are needed in professional and other support positions. The Inuit Bachelor of Social Work degree program between Nunatsiavut and Memorial University is an example of how Inuit-specific programs and responses can be developed. However, Inuit graduates need to see employment opportunities in a system that better reflects Inuit values and knowledge. These graduates have had a low interest rate in working for CSSD, and these are valuable but missed opportunities. And on a very basic level, the department must find ways to keep offices open and phones answered. We heard that CSSD offices are sometimes locked and phones are not answered due to vacancies in administrative support positions. Accessibility for parents, foster parents, and other community resources is very important in matters involving children. And I can attest that we have had that experience as well. We have had times when offices have been locked and we have not been able to get phone calls answered. A very troubling conversation that emerged again and again with so many people revolved around fear and mistrust. Families and communities showed a high level of fear and mistrust towards the Department of Children, Seniors and Social Development. Young people and adults told us that they are fearful when they're dealing with CSSD and do not see it as a resource that they would reach out to. This is based on current experiences as well as in generations of negative experiences with child welfare services. Some participants told us they avoid seeking other services, such as police, health, and shelters, because they fear going on CSSD's radar. This is very troubling. We heard repeatedly that Inuit do not feel empowered and supported to do everything possible for children and families in their communities. And this is a matter of respect and trust for them. Mainstream policies sometimes clash with Inuit values. People told us that they have such a high level of fear and insecurity in dealing with the department that many of them are prevented from challenging or questioning CSSD decisions or approaches. And we also concluded that the whole issue around empowerment or disempowerment is not just an Inuit experience. CSSD staff on the ground recognize the unique challenges in remote and northern communities, but frequently do not have authority to address and make immediate decisions on a day-to-day basis. The bureaucratic decision-making process at headquarters in St. John's often means that decision makers or the person with authority to make approvals is completely removed from the daily reality of life in an isolated Indigenous community on the north coast of Labrador. And anyone who has spent any time here knows that the way things work, the urgency of issues, the resources, the costs of items, the length of time it may take to secure provisions. If you're on the north coast of Labrador, it's very different than if you live in downtown St. John's. So, you know, the environment is a really critical part of making sure that decisions can be made in a timely and in an effective way. This whole issue is truly systemic in nature. It's not about a single program area, it's not about one or two communities, and it's not about the actions of a single worker or an office. I think that bold change is required through the entire system of services for Inuit children and their families. Young people must be heard, relationships reset, power shared, communities engaged, resources enhanced, and very importantly, Inuit knowledge, values, and beliefs must be recognized, respected, and incorporated into new ways of keeping Inuit children and families safe and supported. This report shows that it's important to make change now in the current system because there are children in that system right now, but it also shows how important it is to plan for a different system of the future. I would like to sincerely thank everyone who has joined this conversation along the way, where you shared your hopes and your dreams for Inuit children and families, as well as some of your darkest moments. Your strength moves me. And very importantly, I would like to thank all of the young people who spent time with us. Maybe we played volleyball in your gym or chatted, or maybe you showed us the monkey dance and the seal crawl, and perhaps you proudly recited for us in Inuktitut. I want to thank you for telling us your story and for sharing your experiences, your thoughts, and your ideas. You are amazing. Nakumek. I will say that there are copies of the report on that table in the back, and there is also a translated summary in Inuktitut. You will see in the report that there's artwork depicted throughout the report, and that is the artwork of Inuit children. The front cover you will recognize perhaps as a big mural that's over at the school, and we thought that was really important, and the young people that did that gave us their permission to have that included as well, so we thought that was very fitting. On the back table there, you'll also see that there's information on our office, how to contact us, what to expect, and there's information cards that are also translated into Inuktitut. There's also some small items on the table that you can take home to the children in your life. We generally find that giving a child a business card, a young person a business card, is not very effective. So we have little small items, and it's our name and our phone number on them. And young people or any of you can reach out to our office directly. There's no referrals. It's a really straightforward process. I'm going to open up for questions and comments in just a minute, but then there's some food over on the table, so I would certainly encourage you to stay around and help yourself. And with that, I think that I will open the floor up for any comments or questions.